DeFi, and then ultimately how to use it as well and what you can do with it. So I saw a few hands about DAI in there. Just before we touch on DAI, I think already had a great intro, but yeah, I'm Chris. I was previously in the Maker Foundation as well with Lenka. I was originally a product manager there since 2018. And then as the Maker Foundation dissolved last year, we moved Oasis, that originally formed inside the Maker Foundation, out into its own company, really to be one of the front-end protocols really for Maker and DeFi. But yeah, so what are we going to talk about today? So yeah, we're going to have a very quick introduction on DAI. Also going to very quickly talk to you about the Maker protocol as well, and how that is used to mint and borrow DAI. Also other ways you can borrow DAI around... Okay. Yeah, other ways we can other ways we can mint and borrow DAI, and then also how you can use that DAI either to increase your exposure to certain assets or actually earn a yield on it within DeFi. So again, not using any centralized exchanges, not giving up custody of your money at any point or anything like that. So what is DAI then? So I know a number of you have used it, but just to give a very quick overview then, DAI was the first decentralized crypto-backed USD Pegged Stablecoin. So what does that mean? That means one DAI is equal to $1. It is today backed by a variety of crypto assets, so it's an over-collateralized stablecoin. It's also backed by some real-world assets as well, make up a very small proportion. If you actually look at the, on the bottom right, you can actually see kind of what is backing DAI today. So obviously, there's a large part of that is in USDC, and we're going to talk about why ever so slightly, and then a large part in ETH, wrapped Bitcoin, and so on. DAI actually first launched in 2017, is what is today known as SAI, single collateral DAI. The very first version was just backed by ETH, but now it's backed obviously by a variety of different things. And in November 2019 is when we launched multi-collateral DAI, or what you now see and use today as DAI. And there was over $14.5 billion backing almost $10 billion of DAI in circulation. And obviously, when we first launched multi-collateral DAI, it was a little bit of a rocky start. Like, the peg was kind of bouncing around a little bit, and you can see kind of just above my left shoulder, just kind of like how that chart looks like. But over the last kind of 2 years, really, it's really stabilized and kind of fixed itself really around $1. So what is the Maker protocol? Because the Maker protocol is key, and that's what mints DAI. We don't just mint DAI from a multi-sig. There isn't just 10 billion DAI just kind of floating around that was created on day one or anything like that. DAI is ultimately created through the Maker protocol, which is a set of smart contracts which is used to mint fresh DAI every single time you lock up collateral and borrow DAI against it. So on the screen is a very kind of the standard behavior of what you would do with the Maker protocol and open kind of, let's say, like a vault. This is where you would lock collateral and borrow DAI against it. One of the most popular collaterals, well, the most popular collateral in this system is ETH, and where users are locking up their ETH and borrowing DAI against it. So I spoke before about the Maker protocol and DAI being an over-collateralized stablecoin. Like, the most easiest analogy to this is a mortgage, where you borrow money against the value of your house, like from the bank effectively. Maker works in exactly the same way. You lock up your assets into the Maker protocol, your ETH, and you borrow against it. If you lock $10,000 worth of ETH, you could borrow $3,000 worth of DAI, for example. The big difference between a mortgage and the Maker system is, in particular with ETH and wrapped Bitcoin and so on, is that the price fluctuates a lot more of ETH and wrapped Bitcoin, and in real time as well, compared to your house or your home. So where your home is what you paid for it, and it doesn't really get revalued until you come to move house again. ETH obviously is being kind of repriced every second, or in the Maker system, really, it takes the price every hour. So this means that you need to make sure that you keep your assets in your vault above a certain collateralization ratio. So in the Maker system, if you have locked $200 worth of ETH and borrowed 100 DAI, you would have a collateralization ratio of 200%. This means that you need to maintain, and if the vault parameters contain a minimum collateralization of 150, you need to make sure you maintain at least 150. So you would never open a vault at 150%. You would always open a vault at least like 200, 250% and borrow that DAI against it. But as well as just ETH and so on, like I said before, there was also real-world assets inside the system as well. But each collateral that is approved for borrowing against is approved by Maker governance as well. And it's each collateral and each collateral application goes through this vigorous process where risk teams, technical risk teams, and so on will analyze the collateral and actually set risk parameters such as the minimum collateralization ratio and so on. But crucially, the maker system allows you to borrow DAI. And every time you borrow that DAI, that is brand new DAI that's being minted out of the system, minted out of the smart contracts, and sent to your wallet. So some assets, such as like ETH, BTC, and so on, have multiple options against them. And if we look at ETH, just for example, as it is ETHDay after all, like we actually have 3 different varieties of ETH that we could actually borrow our DAI against. And we kind of term them in Maker as ETHA, ETHB, and ETHC. The difference really here is just the risk properties around them. So ETHC, for instance, is the cheapest one just to borrow DAI against. So if you have, let's say you have $200,000 of ETH in your wallet, and you actually you don't want to give up that ETH, but you do like want to say like you want to buy a new car, you need a deposit for your house. You can use your ETH without selling that, simply just by locking that ETH up in a vault into the Maker protocol and borrowing DAI against it. Now, ETHC, it might be the cheapest to borrow, but it has the highest minimum collateralization ratio, which means it has the highest minimum ratio that you have to maintain at all times. As soon as you go below that minimum ratio, your vault can get liquidated almost instantly. And that collateralization ratio is ultimately dictated by the price of ETH. So if ETH is $1,000 when you lock it in at 200%, and then it goes to $2,000, you're actually going to be at 400% collateralization ratio, which is great. If it falls to $500, you're then going to be much, much lower and possibly at risk of liquidation. So how do you actually borrow DAI on the Maker protocol? Because if any of you have noticed, there is no front end to the Maker protocol per se. There's no MakerDAO.com dashboard or anything like that. And this is actually where Oasis does come in, along with several others around there. So with Oasis, you choose your collateral type, as you just saw on the previous screen. So I think in this next example, we're actually going to look at ETHB, because it has the lowest minimum collateralization ratio. So here you would type in, for instance, you would put your collateral into the top right box. So let's say we deposit, let's say 75 ETH or 50 ETH, and then we want to borrow some DAI. So we want to borrow, let's say, $75,000 worth of DAI. And actually what you can see on here is it kind of shows you kind of like what's that going to do to you? What's that going to give you as a loan, basically? So you can see here that's going to give me a collateralization ratio of 194%, or there or thereabouts. Okay? It's also going to be a liquidation price of $1,950. So that means that ETH cannot go below $1,950. Otherwise, you would lose all of your ETH. Your ETH would be sold, and there's no guarantee that you would get any of that back. If the prices go well in an auction, you may get some back. But these are just some examples of the kind of risk parameters, really, that you can see and how you would open a borrow vault ultimately on the Maker protocol. And again, this is just using the very standard vault system, really. Like the most popular one, really, the kind of end-user vault system on there. But it does enable you to borrow DAI. And as soon as you open this vault, that DAI will go straight into your wallet for you to go and use. And we're going to touch on that a tiny little bit later about what you can actually do with that DAI. Still staying inside the DeFi ecosystem. So there are other ways to borrow DAI as well. Some of them still using the Maker protocol, such as the D3M module. So this is the DAI direct deposit module. Now, you wouldn't use this module as an end user, but actually you may have been borrowing DAI, for instance, on Aave today. And actually, the Maker protocol is connected to Aave through this D3M module, which keeps the borrow rate at a set rate. So not only are Maker governance controlling the rates and the parameters on the Maker protocol, they're also helping to keep a target borrow rate on Aave as well. So from a DAI point of view, if you borrow DAI on Aave, you'll also have the knowledge that DAI is going to be a very kind of like within a certain range, and it's not going to suddenly shoot up to 20 or 30% like several other collaterals could do on Aave, depending on their utilization. So this module allows Maker to lend DAI directly into Aave. It also, and it makes use of it. It does this by making use of its own kind of like vault type, really, called this D3M vault. Like I said, you as a user could not go and use that vault directly, but if you used Aave, you would ultimately be indirectly using this D3M module to mint fresh DAI to keep the borrow rate at its peg. Ultimately, if the borrow rate is above that peg that the Maker governance has set, then it will pump more DAI from the Maker protocol into Aave. If it's below the peg, then it will withdraw that DAI. The next one really from the Maker protocol is the peg stability module, the PSM. And this is effectively almost creates a kind of like a one-to-one swap at all times really between DAI and several other stablecoins that are in the system. This was introduced on the back of Black Thursday when like the demand for DAI absolutely shot through the roof and has ultimately been like more demand for DAI than supply ever since that day really, thanks to DeFi summer. But the peg stability module means that you can lock or swap USDC for DAI or USDP or several others, but always knowing that you're getting a one-to-one swap. So again, you may not realize that when you're swapping, for instance, USDC for DAI, that you're actually borrowing DAI from the Maker protocol. But unlike the other vaults, this is a shared access vault. And actually, you're not actually taking out a loan. You never have to repay that. But actually, you're putting DAI in, you're putting USDC into a Maker vault, and the Maker protocol is just minting DAI, depositing that, and sending it to your wallet. So that DAI out there didn't exist until that moment you kickstarted that transaction. And it's an incredibly useful tool to keep the peg and hold the peg, like hint its name, the peg stability module. But again, it's one of those things you may have used unknowingly. If you ever swapped anything on 1inch or Match or anything like that, any DEX aggregator, there's a very good chance that maybe the DAI USDC PSM may have gone around there to swap from like DAI to USDC or USDC to DAI in particular, to actually help you get the best price for your swap, simply because it's a one-to-one swap no matter what the size of your trade is. You go and use Uniswap or SushiSwap or anything like that, every single time you do that swap, if you do a huge trade, it's gonna impact the price that you get. You're never gonna get one DAI for one USDC. And as we already touched on, you don't have to use the Maker protocol to borrow DAI. You can borrow DAI from a variety of different places, whether that is as a user doing it through a transaction or whether it's through a flash loan as well. You can borrow DAI in a variety of different ways. The two most other popular ways outside of the Maker protocol is obviously Aave, that we've already talked about before, how we've got that D3M connection. We can actually help control the borrow rate on Aave. But the other major place that you can borrow DAI is Compound as well. And on Compound, you can put up any asset you like. It doesn't have to be any of the Maker-supported assets. It can be any asset that Compound supports. And by doing that, you can borrow DAI against that. And it's a very similar model as well on both Aave and Compound, where it's over-collateralized borrowing, or like kind of lending and borrowing. So you supply one side of the loan, or like position, and that you are lending that collateral. So let's say it's ETH again. You are lending ETH to Aave or Compound, and you are borrowing DAI. Now that ETH that you are lending could actually be borrowed by somebody else. And that's the big difference between Aave, Compound, and the Maker protocol. When you supply your assets to the Maker protocol, they can never actually be lent out or anything like that. They remain in your total like kind of custody. They never leave your custody unless you go below that liquidation price. On Aave and Compound, they are actually like potentially going to get lent out. And we're going to touch on those risks ever so slightly within like the next few bits. So how could you also use DAI then to like increase your asset exposure while staying in DeFi? I don't know how many of you have like kind of open like leverage positions in like kind of like traditional finance world or on centralized exchanges, but you go to any kind of centralized exchange and you can open like very easily leverage positions. Now on Maker, a very large use case for the Maker protocol has historically been kind of leverage trading or leverage like trading really. And leverage trading in traditional terms is borrowing funds from a third party, traditionally like a centralized entity, to go long and short on an asset. In the Maker world, the Maker protocol can be that third party. That is the protocol that allows you to borrow that DAI against it. As we talked about, you deposit an asset, you borrow DAI. And this kind of takes us on to the next part of our topic then, really about what do we do with that DAI then, once we've borrowed it, once it's in circulation. So that DAI has ended up in your wallet. If you want to do this manually, you would lock up your ETH, you would borrow DAI, you would head to somewhere like Uniswap, and you would swap it for ETH. You've now got almost twice, or probably 1.5 times as much ETH in your wallet than before you started. But you obviously owe Maker some DAI back. So let's say we deposited $50,000 worth of ETH, we borrowed $25,000 worth of DAI, and we swapped that $25,000 for ETH, or 25,000 DAI for ETH. We now have $75,000 worth of ETH, but we owe the Maker protocol 25,000 DAI, like back in our debt, plus a very small stability fee, which kind of starts at 0.5% and goes up to 4% a year at the moment. But at some point, we have to repay that loan. I say at some point, there are no term kind of conditions, right? It isn't 6 months, it's not a year, it's however long or short you want it to be. So let's say in that period, you're effectively going to go long on the ETH price here because you've borrowed 25,000 DAI, that's priced in USD. You actually want to, like, you're now hoping that ETH goes up in price, right? If that price of ETH doubles in price, you now have $150,000 worth of ETH, but you still only got a $25,000 like DAI debt outstanding, basically. So now let's say you sell $25,000 worth of your ETH to the DAI, take that DAI, go back to the Maker protocol, and push it back into the Maker protocol and withdraw your ETH. You have $125,000 worth of ETH, where initially you started with $50,000 worth of ETH. And you simply just use the Maker protocol to use the funds to borrow. Now again, how would we do this through a UI? Again, this is where kind of Oasis comes in. So ETHB is our example again. You would lock ETH, and we've tried to make this a very simple interaction and taken away all those manual steps, wrapping it inside one easy transaction for you. So ultimately, you would choose how much ETH you want to lock up. So again, here's the example of kind of 50 ETH. You've chosen kind of your target collateralization ratio here, so we've kind of moved it all the way along to 200%. So we're going 2x long on ETH here, basically. And what you can see here is this is actually going to go to the market and buy another 50 ETH. So you're locking 50 ETH. It's going to use that 50 ETH, borrow DAI, and go and buy another 50 ETH. So in your wallet at the very end, you're actually going to have a total exposure to ETH of almost 100 ETH, like obviously a few rounding bits on there too. But in that bottom value there, you can see as well, you're going to have 2x exposure now to ETH. So ETH doubles in price. You don't quite get kind of like the double of it, just the way like kind of leverage work, as it's kind of the leverage exposure kind of goes down as you're moving along the price. But you're pretty much going to end up with, if you're locking $100,000 and it goes up by $10,000, you're going to near as make like 18 to 19,000 extra dollars of ETH on top of the kind of 20,000 that you've already made. So you're effectively up 38,000. Instead, if you just held ETH, you'd be up 20,000. Now, obviously, the downside to that is if the price falls, you lose money much, much quicker. So it's great on the way up, it's awful on the way down. So you've got to kind of time this stuff right. But you can use DAI for doing much more than just going long on ETH. Across kind of DeFi, I'm sure there are tons of apps that you've maybe used in the past, like 3 of the very most popular ones. Again, we've got Compound and Aave on this list. We talked about being able to lend assets. You can lend DAI on these platforms as well to other people. At the moment, they're earning you around kind of like 2 to 3% annualized returns on your DAI. So not great, but it's better than nothing, particularly if you've escaped kind of from a volatile asset into DAI. And then you've got Yearn as well, which kind of puts an extra wrapper on top of things like Compound and Aave to help you earn what should be one of the best rates out there doing it again. Similar sort of stuff to what Oasis is doing. But you can earn a very good sustainable yield, or it should be a fairly sustainable yield. If not great at 2 or 3%, it's better than just holding DAI normally. But again, you stay in full custody of your funds at all times using any of these apps. You never give up your keys. You never send your money to a centralized exchange like Coinbase. It is entirely trustless still. And all you're doing is relying on a couple of front ends to still be there, really. Kind of almost finally then, you can use your DAI also to lend to other like kind of DEX pools, really, like kind of like the Uniswaps and SushiSwaps and so on. But obviously that's pretty manual. You have to make you have to make the other side of the pool as well. So if you want to lend 10,000 DAI to DAI USDC pool, you're going to do 5,000 DAI to 5,000 USDC. I know my time is running out, so we're going to skip ultimately to the really good bit here, ultimately. But on Oasis, we also have this very incredible tool, ultimately making the most of Uniswap, Gelato Network, and the Maker protocol. It's got a bit of a horrible name. It's like GUniV3 DAI USDC. But ultimately what this is, it's a Uniswap V3 pool for DAI USDC, and it's using the Gelato contracts and Maker to mean that whatever you deposit into the Uniswap pool, you can 50x this. So if you've got $10,000, you can 50x it. So you're not only depositing $10,000 into Uniswap, you are depositing, I've got to get my maths right here, $500,000 into Uniswap. So you've got person A over here that's gone and done it manually, gone to Uniswap, set their ranges. They've deposited their 10,000. They're getting some fees. You come and use this product over here, you actually get 50x that, for instance, on there. And you can actually see some of the numbers on there as well from this June dashboard. So, like, yeah, the last 7 days it's been averaging, I think that says around Yeah, it's around 15% at the moment. Kind of 30 days, it's around 9.5%. So it's a much better exposure than, for instance, Compound.Aave. But, and it's always important, obviously, to talk about like the negative sometimes around here is that, one, you are exposing yourself to USDC as well. So this isn't just DAI, but you are swapping generally half and half for DAI USDC. And also, DEX protocols are notoriously like unpredictable. So yeah, 30 days it's been averaging 10%, which might sound amazing, but people might stop trading, maybe DAI and USDC, for instance, on Uniswap, and the volumes go down. Your returns are directly tied to the volumes on the pool. We were going to try and do a live demo of opening one of these positions, but I think the time is up. So we're going to leave it there. Yeah, let's leave it there.